I've walked the path less travelled by, which definitely for my generation is quite common because product management as a career wasn't something you really came out of school or university and went to study or do. It was something that was emerging and had a lot of career switches.
This is The Talent Show, a new podcast series from FT Talent, a hub of innovation from the Financial Times. It's hosted by under 30s for the under 30s around the world. This second series is about all the aspects the FT organization is covering today, from editorial to development, from data to talent. I am Virginia Stagni, and this is a guide we designed to inspire you to be the one driving innovation and change. Welcome to the show. So with me today, I am going to explore with you guys another department of the Financial Times, something that we have been chatting a lot about, product development, technology, and so on. And now we have the person that can answer all our questions, and this is the Chief Product Officer of the Financial Times, Lindsey Jayne. How are you, Lindsey, today?
I'm very well, thank you. It's so lovely to be with you.
So as we normally start our podcast, we always try to ask our guests to walk us through your career path, thing that made you land here at the Financial Times, and things that you believe have been milestones of your work-life journey.
Yeah, I think the way to summarize it would probably be to say I've walked the path less travelled by, which definitely for my generation is quite common because product management as a career wasn't something you really came out of school or university and went to study or do. It was something that was emerging and had a lot of career switches. So for me, the common thread that's kind of led to where I am today has been always working on brands that had meaning for me. That I had a deep interest in the product that I thought made a big difference. An example of that would be definitely the FT. The thing that drew me in here was how important accurate information was, integrity. I thought the heritage and what we'd done with the brand was just, so inspiring, and what a thing to work on that. But also, for instance, when I was at Monzo, where we were really changing people's relationships with money and taking the stress out of it, taking the taboos out of it. So for me, the guiding principle through my career has been very much about working on things that I find meaningful. And in terms of how I ended up in product management, well, that's a wild old ride. I did everything from taking a leave of absence during university when I wasn't very well, leaving South Africa where I'd grown up, coming over to the UK, and finding that it wasn't financially viable to go back to South Africa and back to university. So a very homesick Lindsey stole a friend's idea to become cabin crew. And I actually went to work for Virgin Atlantic, flying long haul on planes, because it was a way to get cheap travel, and it was a way to work my way around the world whilst I saved up enough money to go back to university. And what I ended up doing was studying Japanese, was studying wine. I did an undergrad degree through the London School of Economics part-time whilst I was flying. And at the end of 7 years, I came out of it having seen the world, but also having had the really wonderful experience of working with the Royal College of Art, I think it was, on service design. And it was at the time when Virgin Atlantic were designing the upper class experience, where you started off in your limousine and you were whisked through security and your luggage disappeared and you just landed up in a lounge and you got on a plane and got tucked in a duvet and woke up in New York. So we were thinking about, for the first time, a user's journey all the way through. But that was good fun. And then I thought I'd probably better go get a real job. And travel was still dear to my heart, so I had gone off to join government. I thought I would quite like to be a diplomat. The French ambassador's residence looked pretty awesome. It felt like, a public service, a good thing to do. But it wasn't long into government before I realised that hierarchy and slowness were not my calling cards. And I saw somebody walk past carrying a laptop that was a Mac. And I was like, why does that person have a fast computer? Mine takes 12 minutes to boot up in the morning. And it was there I discovered the government digital service. It was just setting up. And it was the startup inside government where we were, for the first time, we were building our own services using developers, where we were really starting with the customer's need. At that time, every government website, and there were literally hundreds of them, and for broader government, thousands, they were all different. So if I needed to know something for my child about its, Can I get help with my nursery bills? Where do I go to school? I would have to go to 5 different departments. And for the first time, we flipped that on its head and said, no, we start with the user. What do they need? They have a question, and we should make it easy to navigate. And from that, I just went from one product job to another, working Farfetch, which was a global luxury platform, working at Monzo, leading the product function there, their first product leader, via a South African fintech that was very dear to my heart during the pandemic, and now here at the FT. So always working on brands where we're looking at growth, where we're looking at how to stay relevant, where we're looking at engaging more, but always really answering that question, how can we do the thing that's valuable for the user that meets the company's goals?
I think this user centricity is really interesting, and it's something that, we have been trying to explain from so many different perspectives, from the editorial one, the commercial one, and now, of course, from the core part of where you can really show that you are audience first rather than product first. That is really the product and the product side of our business. Listening to your experience, how did you adapt such a mindset to a product and chief product officer role in a kind of structured culture and business as the one of media that is definitely not the one of Monzo and Farfetch, etc.?
Yeah, I think a lot of the principles actually hold, which is that the role of a product manager is to take different expertise and different inputs and bring them together and use judgment and sort of being able to discern to find out what the most valuable solution is to something. And if you're working in banking, sometimes that meant I had lawyers in my team, along with engineers and software developers, and you were designing with those things in mind. And in those sorts of organizations, they do tend to sort of center around a product in that sort of sense. Whereas clearly in media, the thing that we're here to support, the product really is the content that our journalists produce. And our role is very, very much more so about how do we get that to people in the right way? How do we help them find the most value in it? How might we think about packaging it up to meet different people's needs? How can we help tell the story in a more visually arresting way? So the problems are sometimes different because you are working with a part of the bulk of the product already made, but the principles are still there. If I get, an editor in a room with a software developer and a designer, and we've got some user research and some data, we're going to come up with something really interesting. And I think that's what you do see in some of the newer organizations set up, is they're sort of setting up with those capabilities from the start. At the FT, we added, it's been around so long that the internet didn't exist when it was started. And so we added it on later. But where we really do our best work, I think, is where we pull on the expertise of everybody, and the product manager uses their kind of deep knowledge to bring all of that together into a cohesive experience for the user and into something that makes the FT a sustainable business.
What is a product? When you're thinking about a newspaper, I think it's quite obvious to think about the physical newspaper, that is a product. When we're thinking about ft.com, that's a sort of a product. In your head right now, if you had to think, this is the product that my team is really focusing on at the moment, and maybe the most innovative product that you are actually working on.
Yeah, so the simplest way we describe it is a product that is something that you can stand alone by itself and that you could sell or give away. So to give you an example, if you use FT, maybe you use My FT and you follow topic bubbles, and there's a little page in there where you can get a personalized feed. That's not a product because you need the rest of the FT for that to work. So the way we describe a product is something that could stand alone and be offered to somebody and have value. And how we think about prioritizing is actually really not on a product level, it's on an outcome level. So we might have an objective to engage a more diverse audience, or to reach more readers in the United States or listeners, or we might have a goal to grow our subscription base or diversify away. So what we start with is that outcome. And then we go, okay, what are the ways we might do that? So I'll give you an example. When we look at people who cancel their FT subscriptions, please don't do that. And we ask them why. Why did you cancel? A large number of them say, I wasn't getting enough out of it. So you're like, okay, great. So that tells us that they aren't necessarily finding the value they need. And we'll make something called like a decision tree, and we'll say, what are the ways we could change that? Maybe it's about how they discover content. Maybe it's about how we recommend it to them. Maybe it's about their routine and when they log in. And we look at the different ways we can affect that, and then we'll design an intervention to see whether it works. And we'll measure it before, and we'll measure it afterwards, and we'll see whether it worked. Or we'll send out a few different versions into the world and let people test different versions. You might have heard of A/B or multivariate testing. But then asking me what my favorite child is, asking me to pick amongst the products is really, really challenging. We're very lucky, and this is the beauty of being a chief product officer, is that you get a whole product portfolio. And at the FT, our main products are products we build for individual subscribers. Then we have products we are building for corporations or universities or organizations. We have an events business, and then we have a bunch of niche specialist publications as well. And then we actually build a bunch of really cool in-house stuff. So every time one of our journalists writes a story, or a freelancer writes a story, they do that on a content management system called Spark that we built ourselves. In fact, you can actually even get paid on it, because that was part of the workflow of going, I've pressed publish, now it's time to pay me. So we have something interesting happening in all those different places. But personally, my passion, the thing that I'm really interested in is this idea of, we have this amazing heritage, this amazing core pink paper or core pink online experience, but what are we doing to diversify and to grow and to reach a new audience? And for me, that's a really interesting and hard problem.
And I think when we're looking at new generations and how they interact differently with our products, definitely Gen Z, I think it's an interesting opportunity and challenge for legacy brands. What's your view on that? What do you think the products that we have now that are a good fit for a digital native, and maybe things that you can give us a bit of teasers that you're working on or your team is focusing on at the moment?
Yeah, I think for a very long time it was true that people just almost aged into the FT. You got to a certain point in your career and an FT subscription just made sense. And we saw this hold true for generations. But I think a combination of sort of internet era technologies, the pandemic, new generations have meant that that's not really true. And so we are looking to reach a broader audience. And certainly myself, I got the FT during my MBA for free and was really surprised at the breadth of coverage. I thought it was all old men in boiler hats, talking about economics. And there I was reading the best running routes in Paris, or where to get a cheese toastie in Margate, or reading about more geopolitical stuff. And I became hooked through that. So for me, I think price is something that's quite interesting. You know, if you're earlier in your career, are you making the investment in a premium product? The FT can be quite, I think, absolutely worth it, but it's not, the same price as a bottle of milk on your weekly shop. So I think that the products like FT Edit, we've also been doing some experimenting with newsletters that you can subscribe to, kind of open up, make it accessible on price, and then on format. I think you're seeing a lot more from us. Our audience engagement team are awesome. There's a lot more explainer videos on things like Insta. But at the end of the day, we aren't actively going after Gen Z. That it doesn't totally resonate with our brand, but I think there's a lot of really important content in there that people should be paying attention to, whatever age you should be.
This is very interesting. Do you think you needed to tweak or change your expertise on people and the audiences with the FT experience? How do you change your approach in terms of audience know-how and expertise?
Yeah, I think to be really good at your job as a product manager, you have to be a total nerd. You have to be a total nerd about what's happening in the market, what technology is doing, and you have to be a total nerd about your customers. And it's a lot easier to do that when you are your customer, because although you have to be careful of your own bias there as well. But whatever it is, I think just spending a lot of time with your customers and understanding them, your job is to go meet them where they are. If you want to reach an audience, go find where they are, go find the formats they use, go find their daily routines. And we do research studies where we ask people, they might do a diary study, show us how their day happens. You hear the wonderful stories of people opening up the paper at the weekend with coffee, very picturesque. So I think it kind of doesn't matter who your audience is. You have to get to know them, and sometimes you have to work a little harder. I really had to work hard to understand the Chinese audience when I was at Farfetch building, WeChat mini programs. One of the first things I did when I got to the FT was say, give me a headset, I want to go sit and listen to customer care. I want to know what people are phoning us to complain about.
Any other tips for people that are thinking about a career in product?
Yeah, I think product is one of those disciplines where there's an awful lot written about it. Everybody has an opinion, right? There's a lot of stuff out there, and some of it really is quite special. And it's not something you can go to university to study. You can a bit now, actually. There are product courses, and some of the business schools are specializing. But it's an interesting set of skills because you do need to know enough about everybody else's role to be able to challenge and collaborate effectively. I need to understand technology well enough. I need to understand design and user research well enough. But I think ultimately product management comes down to two things: judgment and people. The first one is this ability to think critically, reasoning, to really get underneath something and understand why. Can you debate and somebody pull your ideas apart? Because the biggest challenge in product management is prioritization, choosing what to build because there's so many amazing ideas. So you have to be really sure of your reasoning and really sure of the thing that you've done, and you've gone deep and you're sure that this idea stacks up. And then the other one is people skills, because you're going to be right in the middle. You're going to be pulled in every direction. Somebody, the chief financial officer thinks the button should be red. Marketing thinks we should go after. Everybody's going to have a different opinion. And you have to bring all of those people together, get the best out of them, manage their expectations, and make sure you don't end up with the lowest common denominator because you've kind of aggregated. So at the end of the day, there are specialist skills. There's understanding what makes a good A/B test, or whether this is the right metric, or how to release to the App Store. But the thing that's been really powerful, or the best product managers I've seen, are the ones who are like, am I constantly learning and getting feedback and working on, are my ideas good? Do they stack up? And can I really bring a team together?
What do you think are your best tips for someone that is starting their career? What would be your tips in giving the right storytelling that you gave us today for someone that is not so clear about the beginning of a career path?
Yeah, I think there are as many career paths that are workable as there are stars in the sky. So I'm not sure that there is one clear path that makes the most sense. I mean, I've worked in a range of industries, but always on the same kind of product problem. And then you get people who've had product careers that have been very much about going deep into a particular industry. And both of those have merit and have value. For me, I've just followed my nose to the next most interesting opportunity. And it's only in looking back that it all makes sense. For me, working on meaningful problems with really interesting people has made me better at my job and better at interviews and better at finding the next opportunity, I think, than being very kind of like, in 5 years, I want this, and, I'm missing this skill, so I'll go get it there. But the one thing I would caveat that with is you've kind of always constantly got to be learning. Over the last few months, I've been in a deep learning mode on generative AI. This is a subject I need to understand very, very clearly, because for the last 10 years, the platforms we worked on have been relatively stable. There's been advances in tech, but no huge leaps. And then this comes along. So I need to be as knowledgeable as, somebody who's specializing in these products if I want to stay relevant. So I think, yeah, good teams, good problems, keep learning, and I kind of let the path work itself out. But you do you. There's probably a better way.
What's your take on AI and the FT, and generally AI and journalism?
I ultimately do think of it as a tool. Coming back to the FT for a second, I think that even with the misinformation campaigns that we've seen in the past, with trying to influence elections, with whether or not you can trust what you read out on social media, out in other publications, it's this reputation for trust and integrity and accuracy and holding truth to power that sets us apart. And that's the thing that we need to protect over and above everything else. That's non-negotiable. And I think that becomes easier or more, almost in a way becomes easier when there's more noise in the system. But it also becomes harder because how do you trust your sources? How do you verify? And that's where I think the technology can also help. And whilst today there are a lot of downfalls to how, the lack of alignment, to hallucinations in large language models, to the biases inherent in underlying training sets, in fine-tuning training sets, and I'm sure as well in synthetic data when we get there, is there are a lot of pitfalls. So you have to go in with your eyes very open, but you have to learn how to work it and to experiment. And the way we're thinking about it is we're not designing for what large language models can do today. We're designing for what they'll be able to do in a year, because I believe some of these problems will be resolved and some we will probably fail to resolve, because as society we're not perfect. And if you look at regulation and cookies regulation, we didn't do a good job there. We have a way to go on tech regulation. So I think some of them we won't be perfect on, and we should, I feel very strongly that we have a strong responsibility to champion what's ethical, to make sure there's a diversity of voice in there, to maintain our accuracy and our integrity. But at the same time, it's transformative, exciting tech, and you better believe we're playing around with it. In fact, we demoed some stuff just the other day to some people around the company as we start to learn what the limits are and what its use will be. But I think it's a huge differentiator that the FT has said our work will always be by the experts, and we'll use these tools in ways that support finding the best scoops and helping our readers find the best information out of what we've covered and what's out there in the world.
How do you keep up with all the innovations, with all these different parts and, as well areas of knowledge?
So my way of learning really is using the networks and connections and people I've made to sit down and go, hey, there's things come out. What have you read that's interesting? So a lot of how I learn tends to be about sharing with people stuff I've found interesting and starting a conversation in Slack groups, actual conversations, dinner parties, at conferences, those sorts of things, small community talks. And then also asking people to do the same for me. Say, what's interesting? What have you heard out there? What have you read?
What would be your best tip to your younger self that has the enthusiasm maybe of a startupper and knows how things work in a bit of quicker and digital driven world, but is picking maybe the FT as a place to work and really shine and grow their career?
I think the thing that really has struck me, because I've had quite a few jobs in my career, I've been lucky enough to work in a couple of different organizations, is wherever you go, there you are. So don't think that if you change companies, you'll face different problems, even if the company looks different on the face of it. At the FT, it is much bigger. Turning this tanker does take longer. It's a bigger prize if you pull it off. But a lot of your energy goes into making things possible and less into making them as a leader. And then the teams are there doing the great work of making. But who you are and the things that, am I good at influencing people? Am I good at hearing the quieter voices? Can I spot an interesting opportunity? Can I galvanize people who are not in my team behind this? That's going to be a skill that plays out wherever you go. So I often interview people. I've interviewed literally thousands of people. So I work at the FT 4 days a week, and then on my fifth, I still consult with startups and scale-ups and mentor heads of products in scale-ups. And everybody tells me about how they want to change companies to solve their problems. And I would just say, yeah, some of it is the environment, some of it is the subject matter, but always remember that if you move, probably you're taking yourself with you when you move. So the thing I would tell my younger self is just keep working on you, because that's the constant in your career.
This was really, really good. And I believe it was so interesting because we could hear a bit more the personal opinion that you have. And from, of course, being user-centric in this business, being data informed, I believe we really went a bit into your life journey and really understand what is your approach, of course, to product, but generally to your career. If there is one thing that we do in this podcast is inviting two bright students to ask you directly some questions. Welcome back to the studio, Alex and Nadira. Alex, I'll start with you. Tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, sure. I'm Alex McQuibbin. I'm a graduating, hopefully, if marketing boycotts allow, student at UCL reading PPE. And I'm sort of, I guess, an aspiring journalist, but also aspiring philosophy academic. I've worked at a couple of publications, sort of student journalism type stuff.
All right, what's your question for Lindsey?
So originally I was going to ask about AI, but you've sort of masterfully covered that topic already. So on the same note, you talked about how sort of AI is muddying the water when it comes to truth. So do you think we're living in a sort of, or soon to be living in a post-truth world? How do we deal with it? And is there anything at all that's good about a sort of post-truth attitude towards journalism?
Wow, it's got deep with the PPE student really quick. I don't know about. I mean, the thing about truth, right, is to a certain extent it's relative and it's a perspective, and there is, what can you actually hold to be true? And I think that there will always be, and there have always been, sort of shining lights trying to keep that thing true, or trying. I don't think that will change. I think that there will always be communities, there will always be voices, there will always be businesses that kind of care about making sure that the real story is out there. And I think journalism is definitely an exciting place to be working when you're thinking about truth, because you've literally got people on the front lines risking their lives to make sure that the story does reach us. So, in a couple of dark moments, a few sci-fi movies have hit me. I won't lie. I had a chat actually with one of our directors of tech. We're doing this, like, imagine the world in 2 years and then 10 years, and how do we extrapolate, and what does it? There were some dark moments, but ultimately, I'm an optimist, and I think that that the way humans have always been is kind of the way we always will be, and there will always be those points of light.
What's your take on that from a philosophical perspective?
I mean, I've been scared about the sort of post-truth stuff probably since 2016. I'm not saying why. But yeah, no, I think I share your optimism. I think there is a slight relativeness to truth, at least in social contexts. I think maybe the one good thing to come out of it is that a lot of journalists are realizing that not only do they have to write about the truth, they also have to write well, and they have to, actually get an audience. So, you can't just, list off a bunch of facts. You actually have to bring in some personality and some character to your stories.
Tell a story, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Not just recite the facts. Yeah.
Nadira, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm really good.
Yeah, what are you doing here in London?
So I am a student at King's College London, and I study the BA Digital Media and Culture. So I will be graduating this summer, and I hope to do my master's degree in science communications at Imperial, so that hopefully I can be a technology journalist focusing on how technology is represented in society and in the media as well. So I wanted to ask you, what has been the most rewarding part of your role as a chief product officer? Because I know you spoke about how you find your career and your own personal journey to link together. So I wanted to ask, what maybe is perhaps a memorable project or experience that you have worked on?
Whilst at the FT? Oh, that's a great question. I probably have some deep recency bias here, but I think literally getting some of the generative AI things we were playing around with working yesterday, I was really proud of our team who pushed themselves. And a lot of my best experiences really have been about watching the team do something they didn't think was possible and absolutely nailing it with a great product. There've been lots of great moments along the way. We do things like show and tells, where every week we show something that we're working on. So we have a lot of these like micro celebrations of, yes, you got this thing right. But one of the things I've really enjoyed about the FT actually is having the newsroom just, right down there. Like, I had an awesome conversation with Madhu, who covers AI and is our technology correspondent. Or, you get to bump into people who are deep researchers and deep experts in things that you care about, and they're around to chat to, which has been wonderful. But I don't know. I think my big successes are still to come, or my big favorite moments. I've been at the FT just a year now. So a lot of it has been getting the right team in place and doing things. But we're building some pretty cool stuff, and it's always great when you see a user's reaction or you get an amazing quote. We had one the other day. Someone wrote in the most beautiful letter of thanks about a visualization of a migration of swifts flying from Beijing to Namibia, which is actually in a book review. But we built this capability that meant it's super easy to visualize data on maps that's really easy for our newsroom to use. And so storytelling became much richer because anybody, with relative ease can now bring the story alive in this kind of visual way. And having someone write in and go, hey, I really like this, it's amazing that you did this is always nice.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for your questions. And of course, thank you so much, Lindsey, for all your time and your insights and being, so open in sharing your opinions and of course, your life journey with us. Just a quick reminder, we got An Edge, that is a new podcast from the Financial Times. I really recommend you to check it out and up for the next episode. Thank you so much. This has been The Talent Show, which is produced by the FT Talent team, Aya Al-Shihabi, and me, Virginia Stagni. Our podcast producer, editor, and sound engineer is Arturo Ochoa, and our social media producer is Letizia Clementi. Our music is by Dennis Kishuk. Check out all of the Talent Show episodes at fttalent.ft.com, subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and follow FT Talent on socials for updates. Until next time, and keep listening.